In episode 32, titled Wireless Recon Basics, we're going to cover wireless fundamentals in a way that turns signals into security meaning, because wireless scenarios on Pentest Plus are often about interpretation and discipline more than about flashy techniques. Wireless recon is a discovery phase where you learn what networks appear to exist, how they present themselves, and what risk clues show up in their identifiers and behaviors. The exam frequently tests whether you can distinguish "I can see it" from "I can access it," because visibility is common while authorized access is constrained by encryption, authentication, and scope. Wireless also introduces extra safety considerations because radio environments can affect real users immediately if you behave carelessly. The goal here is to help you hear a list of wireless observations and translate it into a prioritized, risk-aware view of what deserves attention. By the end, you should be able to classify wireless signals calmly, document them clearly, and choose next steps that stay within boundaries. Wireless recon begins with key identifiers, because identifiers are how you describe what you are seeing without guessing what is behind it. The network name is a human-facing label that suggests what the network is intended to be, but it can also be misleading or duplicated, so it should be treated as a clue rather than as a guarantee. Access point identity refers to the unique "who is broadcasting" aspect of the network, which matters because multiple access points can share a network name while representing different physical devices and different risk surfaces. Channel use matters because it reflects how the wireless environment is structured, including whether networks are crowding each other and whether a suspicious network is operating in an unusual space. In exam scenarios, these identifiers often appear as a list of detected networks and access points, and the test is whether you can extract meaning from them without assuming you have access. A professional recon mindset records identifiers first because that creates a stable foundation for later analysis and reporting. When you can name what you see precisely, you reduce confusion and improve defensibility. Signal strength is a common clue in wireless recon, but it should be understood conceptually as a proximity hint, not proof of access or ownership. Stronger signal strength often implies closer physical proximity, but it does not prove that the access point is inside the building, inside the authorized space, or controlled by the client. Weak signals can still be important because they can represent exposure outside the intended boundary, such as a network that bleeds beyond walls into public space. The exam often tests whether you treat strength as a risk cue rather than as a permission cue, because "I can see it strongly" does not mean I am allowed to engage. Strength can also vary due to environmental factors and device differences, so it should be treated as approximate evidence rather than as a precise measurement. A professional approach uses signal strength to prioritize investigation and to infer likely location patterns, while remaining cautious about conclusions. When you treat strength as a hint, you avoid overconfident decisions. Encryption types can be described in plain terms as stronger versus weaker protections for wireless communication and access, and the exam expects you to reason about risk based on that distinction. Stronger encryption and modern authentication methods generally provide better resistance to casual interception and unauthorized joining, while weaker or absent protections increase exposure and simplify attacker behavior. The key is not to recite encryption acronyms, but to recognize whether a network appears well protected, weakly protected, or effectively open. An open network is high risk because it removes a major access barrier and increases the likelihood of unauthorized use, even if the internal environment still has controls. Weak pairing or outdated protections are also risk cues because they can lead to easier compromise or misconfiguration patterns. In Pentest Plus scenarios, encryption clues often appear as part of the network list or as a description of what the client uses, and your job is to translate that into prioritization. When you can classify encryption strength, you can identify which networks deserve immediate attention for safety and governance reasons.
Client behavior is another rich source of recon meaning because devices connect, roam, and reveal patterns that reflect user habits and network trust relationships.
Roaming behavior implies that clients will shift between access points as they move, which can create moments where trust decisions are made repeatedly and where weak configurations can matter.
Devices also reveal preferred networks through their behavior, which can hint at what networks they trust and what names they search for, though this must be handled ethically and within authorized boundaries.
In exam terms, client behavior can indicate whether a network is actively used, whether clients are connecting unexpectedly, or whether devices are seeking networks that could be impersonated. This is where wireless becomes deeply tied to identity and trust, because a client's preference is a form of trust signal that attackers can exploit.
A professional recon mindset observes client behavior to understand risk, not to manipulate devices or cause disruption.
When you can interpret client behavior, you can reason about real-world likelihood and exposure. Rogue access point risk is one of the most important wireless recon concepts because imposters can mimic trusted names and exploit user trust.
A rogue access point can present itself with the same network name as a legitimate network, causing clients to connect if configuration and behavior allow it.
The exam often tests whether you understand that duplicate names are not automatically benign, especially when other identifiers suggest that the access points are not part of the known infrastructure.
Rogue risk is about trust confusion, where the user believes they are connecting to a trusted network, but the connection is actually to an imposter. This can lead to exposure of credentials, traffic interception, or redirection to malicious services, depending on what the environment allows.
In Recon, the goal is to detect clues that a rogue might exist, such as suspicious duplicates, unusual channels, or unexpected access point identities.
When you treat duplicate trusted names as a high-risk clue, you prioritize the right investigation without claiming compromise prematurely.
Configuration clues matter because many wireless risks are configuration risks rather than hacking tricks. Open networks are the clearest clue because they remove barriers and increase likelihood, especially in public or mixed-use environments.
Weak pairing behaviors can indicate misaligned security expectations, where users or devices connect without sufficient verification, increasing the chance of rogue acceptance.
Default setups can indicate poor hardening, such as leaving default naming, default management settings, or overly permissive access behavior in place longer than intended.
The exam often frames these as misconfiguration rather than as vulnerability, and the correct response is usually to identify the risk and recommend corrective controls, not to escalate into disruptive behavior.
Configuration clues also help you prioritize which networks to focus on, because the weakest configurations are often the highest likelihood pathways to misuse. When you can recognize configuration clues quickly, you can classify risk and choose safe next steps. There are common pitfalls in wireless recon, and Pen Test Plus frequently tests them because they reflect maturity. Confusing discovery with access is the most common pitfall because seeing a network is easy and joining a network is a different activity with different permissions and safety implications. Causing disruption unintentionally is another pitfall because careless wireless actions can affect user connectivity and operations immediately. Another pitfall is assuming that a network name reflects ownership, because names can be duplicated, misconfigured, or chosen poorly, and ownership must be validated through authorized processes. Overconfidence based on signal strength is also a pitfall, because strength is not proof of control or permission. The professional approach is to treat recon as observation and classification, not as interference or experimentation. When you avoid these pitfalls, your wireless work remains safe, legal, and defensible. Now imagine a scenario where you hear a network list and need to identify high-risk candidates because this is a common exam pattern. You are given a set of detected networks, some of which appear open, some of which appear protected, and some of which share similar names that could represent duplicates. The first high-risk candidates are open networks, especially if they resemble corporate naming or if they appear in places where they could be used for unauthorized access. The second high-risk candidates are suspicious duplicate names, especially if a trusted name appears multiple times with inconsistent identifiers or unusual channel behavior, because that can suggest misconfiguration or rogue presence. You also consider where client behavior points, such as clients seeking or connecting to a network in a way that seems inconsistent with policy, because that can increase likelihood of misuse. The professional next step is to document these candidates clearly and to plan safe, authorized validation rather than jumping into actions that could disrupt connectivity. This scenario tests whether you can prioritize by risk cues, not whether you can perform a technical stunt. Quick wins in wireless recon tend to focus on open networks and suspicious duplicate names because these are high signal indicators that often lead to meaningful findings. Open networks are quick wins because the risk is immediate and easy to explain. Lack of protection increases exposure and likelihood of misuse. Suspicious duplicate names are quick wins because they point to trust confusion risk, which is often a high-impact issue when users assume they are on a safe network. Another quick win is identifying networks that appear to use weak or default configurations, because those often indicate governance gaps that are fixable through policy and configuration changes. The exam rewards these priorities because they are practical and aligned with minimizing harm. Quick wins are not about escalating activity. They are about identifying high-risk patterns early and communicating them responsibly. When your quick wins are grounded in clear risk cues, your recommendations fit the environment.
Documenting wireless findings should capture identifiers, strength, and observed behaviors in a way that supports later reporting and safe validation.
Identifiers include the network name and access point identity markers because those distinguish legitimate infrastructure from suspicious duplicates. Strength should be recorded as an observation with context, such as strong nearby versus weak distant, without treating it as precise measurement because variability is high. Observations should include encryption posture, whether a network appears open or protected, and any client behavior patterns that are relevant to risk, such as frequent connections or unusual roaming behavior. Documentation should also include constraints and boundaries, such as what actions were permitted and what was not attempted, because wireless work is sensitive to authorization and safety.
In exam contexts, disciplined documentation reflects professional maturity and helps you avoid overclaiming. When your notes are clear, your later recommendations become more credible.
Boundaries and safety deserve extra emphasis in wireless contexts because radio actions can cross physical boundaries and affect unintended parties. Avoid interference and respect permitted actions, meaning you operate strictly within what the engagement authorizes and you avoid behavior that could disrupt legitimate users. Wireless signals can extend outside buildings and beyond controlled spaces, which means you must be careful not to treat everything you can see as fair aim. Safety also includes communicating through established escalation paths if you detect something that could indicate an ongoing risk, such as a rogue access point, because the organization may need to act quickly. On Pen Test Plus scenarios, the correct answer often involves pausing and escalating when a safety or scope boundary is at risk, rather than continuing exploration silently. The professional model is to observe, classify, document, and coordinate, not to act impulsively. When you keep boundaries front and center, you stay aligned with both exam expectations and real-world practice.
A simple memory phrase can keep wireless recon structured, and a useful one is identify, classify, observe clients, report. Identify means capture the network name, access point identity, channel, and encryption posture, because those are the raw facts that support analysis.
Classify means decide which networks look higher risk based on openness, weak protections, duplicates, or default-like configurations, without assuming access.
Observe clients means watch behavior patterns that influence likelihood, such as roaming and preferred network behavior, while staying ethical and non-disruptive.
Report means document what you saw with context and confidence, and escalate appropriately when risk or safety triggers appear.
This phrase keeps Recon focused on risk interpretation rather than on technical theatrics.
It also maps cleanly to exam questions, which often ask what to do next after observing wireless signals. If you can run the phrase quickly, you will choose safer, more professional next steps.
In this episode, the key is that wireless recon turns identifiers, signal strength, encryption posture, client behavior, and duplicate name patterns into a risk-aware map without confusing observation with access. Network name, access point identity, and channel use provide structure, while signal strength provides proximity hints that must be interpreted cautiously. Encryption strength and configuration clues help you prioritize high-risk candidates, especially open networks and suspicious duplicates that suggest rogue risk. Avoid pitfalls like assuming discovery equals permission or causing disruption, and document findings with clear identifiers, strength observations, and behavior notes under strict boundaries. Use the identify, classify, observe clients, report phrase to keep your thinking structured, and then classify one network by risk aloud in your head by naming the clue that drives your assessment and the safest next step you would take. Identify, classify, initial access points, low-type phishing, moderate. Observe, patches of registry, related data drops in medium clarity. Report, a PI is moving their environment. When you can do that, wireless recon questions become straightforward interpretation and governance rather than guesswork. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.